You approved this.
I had no choice. The data was solid.
Solid, we lost millions.
You're blaming me? You pushed the timeline.
You're finished here.
Wait, let's review the numbers.
This is insane.
The morning Marcus Whitfield fired his wife in front of everyone. He didn't know. He was firing his boss.
You went behind my back. In front of everyone. You are done here. Erased.
What he didn't know was that she already owned 41% of the company he just humiliated her in. She never wanted revenge. She wanted to protect what they'd built, even after everything he did. I move that we accept the proposal.
All those in favor? Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it reveals exactly who you were the whole time no one was watching.
The morning Marcus Whitfield fired his wife in front of 43 employees, he didn't know he was firing his boss. That's the part nobody tells you about pride. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't warn you before it opens its mouth. It just stands there in a glass conference room on the 32nd floor, pointing a finger at the one person who could have saved everything, and lets the whole building watch. I've told a lot of stories, betrayals, comebacks, secrets that finally came due. But this one still gets me, because it isn't about a villain. It's about a good man who let fear dress itself up as strength, and a woman who loved him enough to save him from a distance, even after he humiliated her. Stay with me. This one earns its ending. Marcus Whitfield built Whitfield Logistics out of a single leased box truck and a phone number that used to ring in his mother's kitchen in South Atlanta. 14 years later, the company moved freight for 3 Fortune 500 clients and occupied 4 floors of a tower off Peachtree with his name etched into brushed steel in the lobby. People who'd known him since he was hauling pallets himself now called him Mr. Whitfield without irony. He liked that, maybe too much. Marcus had a habit, small, almost sweet, if you didn't know what it cost him. Every morning at 6:40, before the office filled, he stood at the window of his corner office and looked down at the trucks pulling out of the depot, engines coughing awake in the gray light. He'd count them, not because he needed the number, because counting them reminded him he used to be the one driving. He also had a habit of forgetting who taught him to count. Ruth Whitfield had married Marcus 9 years ago, back when Whitfield Logistics was 6 trucks and a business loan, co-signed by her father against his better judgment. She wasn't some ceremonial wife who showed up at galas in borrowed jewelry. Ruth had an MBA from Emory, 12 years in corporate restructuring before she left it to fold herself into Marcus's dream, and a mind for numbers sharper than anyone in that building, including the CFO who owed his job to her recommendation. For the first 6 years, Marcus asked Ruth about everything: contracts, hires, the acquisition of the Charlotte warehouse. She was his silent co-founder, though her name never made it onto a single piece of letterhead. That had been her choice, back when she still believed being in the room mattered more than being on the wall. Somewhere around year 7, the room stopped needing her permission. It wasn't one moment, it was 100 small ones. A meeting she wasn't invited to because it was just numbers stuff, babe, nothing exciting. A decision reversed after she'd spent a weekend building the model for it, reversed by a board member who golfed with Marcus on Saturdays. A running joke among the executive team, gentle, never said with malice, but said, about Ruth's little spreadsheets. Ruth didn't fight it loudly. She wasn't built that way. She watched. And where some women would have packed a bag, Ruth did something else entirely. She started buying. Not out of spite. That's important. I need you to understand that, because everything Ruth Whitfield did over the following 18 months came from a place most people mistake for its opposite. She wasn't trying to destroy her husband's company. She was trying to protect it from him. Whitfield Logistics had taken on debt to fund an aggressive expansion into the Gulf Coast. Marcus's idea pushed through over the quiet objection of 2 board members who'd since resigned rather than fight him. That debt had been restructured into convertible notes, sold off in pieces to cover cash flow gaps nobody outside the finance department knew existed. Ruth knew, because Ruth had built the original models, and Ruth understood something Marcus, drunk on his own ascension, refused to see. Those notes were converting to equity. Whoever held them would soon hold the company. So she bought them, quietly, through a holding entity with a name that meant something only to her, Ruth Holdings, formed under her maiden name, structured through a law firm 3 states away, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Piece by piece, note by note, over a year and a half, using money from her own pre-marriage inheritance and a settlement from her mother's estate that Marcus had never bothered to ask about, because Marcus had stopped asking Ruth about anything that wasn't dinner. By the spring, Ruth Holdings owned 41% of Whitfield Logistics. She never planned to reveal it. That's the part that still catches in my throat when I think about this story. Ruth wasn't building toward a confrontation. She was building a floor underneath her husband so that when the debt finally came due, as she knew it would, there would be someone in the room who actually understood what was happening, someone who could keep 300 employees from losing their jobs when the banks came calling. She intended to hold the shares silently, forever if she had to, a guardian angel with a spreadsheet. She just hadn't planned on the Tuesday morning that changed everything. The Tuesday started the way most disasters start, with someone trying to look good in front of someone more important than they were. Whitfield Logistics was 3 weeks from closing a $40 million contract with a national retail chain, the kind of deal that would double their footprint in the Southeast. The retailer's regional VP, a sharp-eyed woman named Denise Calloway, had flown in for a final walkthrough of operations before signing. Ruth had noticed something in the fulfillment projections 2 days earlier, a scheduling conflict buried in the automated routing system that would cause the retailer's first shipment to arrive 4 days late, right in the middle of the client's biggest seasonal push. She'd flagged it in an email to the operations director, quietly. The way she flagged everything now, hoping someone would fix it before it became her business to fix out loud. Nobody fixed it. So that morning, in the glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor, with Denise Calloway sitting at the head of the table and half the executive staff arranged around it like nervous furniture, Ruth spoke up. Marcus, before we move forward, I think there's a conflict in the routing model for the first fulfillment cycle. If it's not corrected, the retailer's initial shipment lands 4 days behind schedule. The room went still in that particular way. Rooms go still when someone has said something true that nobody wanted to hear. Marcus felt it before he understood it. 30 pairs of eyes flicking toward him, waiting to see how he'd handle being corrected by his wife in front of the biggest client of his career. And something in him, something small and frightened, and 14 years in the making, decided in that instant that his authority mattered more than the truth. Ruth, His voice had an edge she hadn't heard directed at her before. Not at home, not ever. This isn't the time. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm telling you there's an error in. You're not on the operations team. He said it flatly, like a door closing. You're not on any team. I don't know why you're even in this meeting. Denise Calloway's pen had stopped moving. Ruth felt her face go warm, the particular heat of humiliation delivered by someone who's supposed to be your shelter. She kept her voice level. Marcus, I'm asking you to look at the numbers before you sign anything. And that's when Marcus Whitfield, 3 weeks from a $40 million deal, 14 years removed from a box truck his wife's family money helped him lease, stood up at the head of that table and said the sentence that would end up costing him everything he thought he was protecting. You're done here. I mean it. Pack up whatever you think you're doing at this company, because as of right now, you don't work here. You never did. Security will walk you out. Nobody moved. Denise Calloway's eyes went wide with the particular discomfort of a stranger witnessing a marriage break in public. A young analyst near the window lifted her phone half an inch off the table, thumb hovering, before thinking better of it and setting it back down, though not before Marcus's assistant, standing near the door, had already quietly pulled hers out and started recording, certain that whatever this was, somebody was going to need proof it happened. Ruth didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She looked at her husband for 3 long seconds, the kind of look that isn't anger so much as the final closing of a book, and she reached for the manila envelope she'd carried into that meeting, the one with the routing analysis inside, the one she'd hoped would never need to become anything more than a footnote in a project she'd never take credit for. She slid it back into her bag, along with the folded printout bearing the letterhead she'd kept hidden for 18 months. Ruth Holdings, LLC. All right, Marcus, she said quietly, standing, smoothing her blazer with a steadiness that unsettled everyone in that room more than tears would have. I'll go. She picked up her bag. She walked past the head of the table, past Denise Calloway, whose expression had shifted from discomfort into something colder and more calculating, past the young analyst, past the assistant still filming with her phone angled low against her hip. At the door, Ruth paused, just for a second, just long enough for the room to feel it. You should probably call your lawyer before end of day, she said, not turning around. Not about the routing error, about something you're going to want to sit down for. Then she was gone, the glass door swinging shut behind her, with a soft final click that somehow sounded louder than anything shouted in that room all morning. Marcus stood there, chest still tight with the adrenaline of having won, watching his wife's reflection shrink in the elevator bank glass across the hall. Something in his stomach had already started to sink before his brain caught up to why. Denise Calloway cleared her throat. Mr. Whitfield, she said, folding her hands on the table. I think we should reschedule the signing. Marcus barely heard her. He was still staring at the door his wife had just walked through, replaying the phrase she'd left hanging in the air, like a blade balanced on its point. Something you're going to want to sit down for. He didn't know it yet, but by 5 o'clock that evening, a letter would arrive from a law firm 3 states away, printed on letterhead he'd never seen before, informing him that Ruth Holdings, LLC, holder of 41% of Whitfield Logistics, would be exercising its rights as majority stakeholder in the upcoming board vote. 41%, his 42%. And the 12% held by the 2 board members who'd resigned in protest over the Gulf Coast expansion, the same 2 board members Ruth had been quietly advising for the past year. The math wasn't close. It had never been close. Marcus Whitfield had just fired the one person in that building who could tell him with absolute certainty that in 6 hours he would no longer control the company that bore his name. The letter arrived at 4:52 p.m., delivered by courier to the front desk of Whitfield Logistics, addressed not to Marcus's office, but to the board's general counsel, which meant 3 other people read it before he did. By the time Marcus's assistant walked it into his office, her face carefully arranged into neutrality, he already knew from the way she was holding it that this wasn't paperwork. This was a verdict. He read it twice standing up, because sitting down felt like admitting something. Ruth Holdings, LLC, 41% ownership, acquired via convertible note conversion over the preceding 18 months, intent to exercise shareholder rights at the emergency board session, scheduled per bylaws within 5 business days. 41%. He read the entity name 3 more times, like it might rearrange itself into someone else's name. It didn't. Ruth Holdings. Her maiden name, tucked into a legal structure so clean it had taken his own general counsel 2 hours on the phone with the filing firm just to confirm it was real. He called her 4 times. She didn't answer any of them. On the 5th try, a text came back. 3 lines, nothing more. I'm not trying to hurt you. I never was, but I'm not walking back into a room where I get erased in front of strangers. My lawyer will be at Thursday's meeting. Marcus sat in his dark office long after the building emptied, the city lights coming up outside the window where he used to count trucks, and for the first time in 14 years, he understood what it felt like to not know what happened inside his own company. The emergency board session convened Thursday morning in a conference room, 1 floor below the one where Marcus had ended his marriage, in front of 43 witnesses. This time there were only 9 people in the room, and Ruth Whitfield sat at the far end of the table, not as a guest, not as anyone's wife, but as the single largest shareholder of Whitfield Logistics, flanked by a corporate attorney named Priya Anand, who had spent 18 months making sure this exact meeting would go exactly as smoothly as it now did. Marcus watched his wife hand a folder to the board secretary with the same steady hands she'd used to slide the routing analysis back into her bag 3 days earlier. He watched her open with a voice that had none of the tremble he half expected and all of the calm he should have recognized from 9 years of marriage, because it was the same voice she used every single time she was about to be right about something he didn't want to hear. I want to be clear about something before we start, Ruth said, looking not at Marcus, but at the rest of the board. I didn't build this position to take the company from my husband. I built it because 18 months ago, I saw the debt restructuring headed somewhere that would have cost 300 people their jobs, and nobody with the authority to stop it was willing to listen to the person who saw it coming. She turned a page. The routing conflict I raised on Tuesday wasn't a mistake I stumbled into. It's been sitting in the fulfillment model for 6 weeks. I flagged it in writing to operations twice. Nobody acted on it because, as I was reminded in front of our biggest prospective client, I don't work here. A pause, not for effect, but because even Ruth needed a breath to get through it. I don't. Officially, I never did. But I am the reason this company still has a shot at the Callaway contract, because I spent Tuesday night rebuilding the fulfillment schedule myself and sent it to Denise Callaway's team directly, along with an apology for the confusion in that meeting. Marcus's head came up sharply. You went around me to the client? I saved the deal you were about to lose, Ruth said, still not raising her voice, still not looking at him the way she used to, with love instead of law. Denise called this morning. The contract signs Monday. Not because of you, in spite of you. The room was silent the way rooms get silent, when the balance of power has already shifted, and everyone is simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up to the truth. Priya Anand slid a second document across the table. Ruth Holdings intends to exercise a board seat, effective immediately, as is our right under the shareholder agreement. We're also requesting a formal review of the executive decision-making process that allowed a known scheduling conflict to go unaddressed for 6 weeks, despite written warning. Marcus opened his mouth, to argue, to assert, to do the thing that had worked for him in every room for 14 years, and found, for the first time in his career, that there was nothing underneath the words, no leverage, no trump card. Just a man standing at the head of a table he no longer fully owned, looking at the woman he'd humiliated in front of strangers, who had spent 1.5 years quietly making sure that humiliation would never be able to sink the thing they'd both built. Ruth. His voice cracked on the second syllable. Why didn't you just tell me? And here is the moment I think about most, out of every story I've ever told you. Because Ruth Whitfield could have made this about revenge. She had every card, every reason, every witness on her side. Instead, she looked at her husband the way you look at someone you're grieving, even though they're standing right in front of you. I tried to tell you for 6 years, Marcus. In meetings you stopped inviting me to. In models you stopped asking for. In a boardroom 3 days ago, in front of 40 people, when I told you there was a problem, and you told me I didn't belong in the room. She closed her folder. I didn't build this position to punish you. I built it because somebody had to protect this company from the version of you that stopped listening. I was hoping I'd never have to prove it. You made sure I did. Marcus sat down, not because the meeting required it, because his legs, for the first time in 14 years, didn't feel like they belonged to a man in charge of anything. The board vote passed 6-3. Ruth Whitfield took a seat on the board of Whitfield Logistics that afternoon, not as Marcus's wife, but as its second largest individual shareholder, with veto power over any future restructuring decision. The Callaway contract signed the following Monday, on schedule, with Ruth's corrected routing model as the operational backbone, Denise Callaway specifically praised in her closing remarks. Marcus kept his title. The board saw no need to remove a man who had, whatever his failures of character, built something worth saving, but they quietly restructured decision-making authority in a way that made sure no single ego could ever again silence the person seeing the problem first. It took Marcus 4 months to ask Ruth to have dinner with him outside of a boardroom. It took her 2 more to say yes. When she finally did, it wasn't at the corner office with the view of the trucks. It was at the small kitchen table in the house they'd bought back when 6 trucks felt like a miracle, back before he'd learned to count anything but the number of people watching him. I don't know if I can undo what I did, Marcus told her that night. No lawyers in the room. No 41%, just a man across a table from the woman who'd saved his company by refusing to let him destroy it. I know I can't erase what everyone saw. Ruth was quiet for a while. Then she said the thing that, I think, is the whole reason this story exists. You didn't lose the company that morning, Marcus. You lost the right to assume I'd always be standing quietly behind you, no matter how you treated me in front of a room. The company survived because I refused to let your pride take 300 families down with it. Whether we survive, that's a different ledger, and I haven't finished the audit. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it reveals, with brutal clarity, exactly who you were the whole time you thought no one was watching, and exactly who was quietly building the floor to catch you, long after you'd stopped deserving it. If this story made you think twice about who's really holding up the room you're standing in, let me know. I read every comment.